Get your food or your tea, whatever you like. We're going to start off with Charles Franz, who's representing Sarah, since she's not going to be here. And he's with the Unitarian Universal Fellowship. So he's going to say a few words. And this is our president right here, Rehan Razor.
Well, it's an honor to be here, both the Muslim faith community in Topeka and many immigrants who are represented in this faith community. I'm speaking the words of Reverend Sarah Dunnigan. We know that this community has individuals and families from more than 30 different countries. And we honor the diversity of culture and gifts that come with you to Topeka, Kansas. As Unitarian Universalists, we are committed to protecting religious freedom as well as a cultural identity from persecution and negative representation. I would like to share from our 2016 Action of Immediate Witness at our General Assembly last summer. Because Unitarian Universalist Association's principles call us as member congregations to affirm and promote the inherent worth and dignity of every person, and the goal of world community with peace, liberty, and justice for all, whereas our living tradition draws from many sources, including wisdom from the world's religions which inspire us in our ethical and spiritual life, and Jewish and Christian teachings which call us to respond to God's love by loving our neighbors as ourselves. Whereas the United States Constitution is founded in part on the freedom of religious belief and practice. Whereas the histories of Unitarianism, Universalism, and Unitarian Universalism affirm the importance and centrality of freedom of religious belief and practice in this country. Whereas Muslims and others perceived as Muslims in the United States have faced increased levels of discrimination and hate since 9/11. Whereas the refugee crisis in Syria has become a target of this fear, prejudice, and xenophobia. Whereas Muslim leaders have reached out to Unitarian Universalists asking for our partnership to combat Islamophobia, and congregations have responded with support. Therefore be it resolved that the 2016 General Assembly of the Unitarian Universalist Association expresses its love, respect, and support for Muslims in our communities, and encourages its member congregations to build bridges of partnership with Muslim neighbors in our local areas, increase understanding of Islam within and beyond our local congregations, especially in this political moment, learn more about and act on the realities of religious discrimination and the various refugee crises, and offer support to refugees, Syrian and other, within our communities. Challenge acts and words of Islamophobia in solidarity and coordination with Muslims. Advocate in opposition to Islamophobic bills and actions in our local and national governments, pay particular attention to increased surveillance and anti-immigration efforts, and work to foster greater inclusion of all peoples, regardless of their religious, ethnic, national, and racial identities. In addition, our Unitarian Universalist Service Committee is working on behalf of refugees worldwide concerned about human rights and needs, and says, today the world is facing the largest refugee crisis since World War II. Anti-immigrant and anti-Muslim hate groups are mobilizing their members, working to suspend the United States refugee resettlement program by using the same economic and national security arguments that kept our country from helping Jews, dissidents, and children trying to escape Nazi-occupied Europe 80 years ago. It was a tragic chapter in our history then, and we cannot afford to repeat it. Our religious community is deeply committed to advocating for human rights for all people here in the U.S. and in the world. We are glad to count you as neighbors and friends, and hope you know that you can count on us to stand by your side in the face of threats to your dignity and your rights. We recognize your significant contribution to our community and want each of you to hear that we see you, we hear you, and we walk with you.
Thank Reverend Charles for his words, very kind words, and we really appreciate that. Now, the next one we're going to call is Professor Chris Hamilton, who's also a representative of the Baha'i Faith, and most of you know him. He's a professor at Washburn University, been there for many years, and he's also with the Center for Peace and Justice. Chris Hamilton, please.
I'm very, very honored and very happy to be here. I've been in this community for 20 years. Some of my very dearest friends are in the community here in the Islamic Center. I teach world religions and politics at Washburn. I've been teaching this for decades. I also teach peace studies, and I also teach extremist movements. I represent the Baha'i faith. I've been a Baha'i for 41 years. It's a religion that's not maybe known quite as much as some, but it has 9 million, 10 million members around the world. Briefly, its relationship to Islam is that it historically, 200 years ago, grew out of Persia and Iranian Shiism in almost a similar way that Christianity grew out of Judaism. So you can use that as a starting idea. A separate religion with scriptures, but with roots in Islam. Now in my teaching, I emphasize, I've studied Muhammad and his life for years, in the early years. A high perspective is called progressive revelation, which is that God has honored all cultures and all peoples with, pick your word, prophet, divine messenger, teacher. We share that with Islam, although we might be a little more universal than that when we look at Buddha and Zoroaster and indigenous peoples that are mentioned literally in our scriptures. The idea of the universal God is central to us, as it is to Islam. And what I teach students is that the so-called Islamic extremists really only crept into existence after a period of colonialism in the modern era, after the 1920s. And it isn't a long tradition at all, and it is a heretic tradition. It has roots mostly in the reaction, the overreaction to foreign rule. So I would try to teach the parallel with what happened to the Indians in the United States. What I want to say is that in my teaching and our understanding, Muhammad is very elevated. In a sense, he is more than a prophet, even in Islamic teaching. We use the term divine manifestation. And the more you study Islam and the more you study the early years in the life of Muhammad, the more you will become entranced with his example of living as an example for all the virtues that you can imagine. And it is always interesting, as I cover Islam, the great teachings of Muhammad on women, which were centuries ahead of the West. And on war, teaching peace studies were several centuries ahead on how you conduct war in a just way before the Christians ever thought of it. There's so much there's so much in Islam that is beautiful and honorable, extremely diverse across the planet. It's a challenge to teach in these days with Islamophobia. I spend much time trying to separate the crazy politics and to display the misunderstandings and the twistings. It's becoming harder for me every year, and we can't just have a few people working on this anymore. We all have to learn more and express, to talk back to hate, to explain what is true about the religion and about human rights. We can't just leave that up to others in these times. Literally, that's all I wanted to say.
We thank Chris for his words, and we have been knowing Professor Hamilton for a long time, and he's invited us several times to come to Washburn University to talk about Islam. I might mention to you also that we are open and available to come to you, to your churches or other places of civil nature to talk about Islam and try to answer questions if any of you have that interest in the future. So we're not a group or an organization that like to hide, but we like to be out in the public, and we like to offer whatever services as far as Islam is concerned that you may request. The next speaker that's going to come up is going to be our mayor of the city. So we're going to have Mayor Larry Walgas to come up now and say a few words.
Good afternoon. I can learn this process here. Well, it's an honor to be here in so many different ways for Topeka, for our community, for who we are, for what we believe, what's important in our lives. And I have to start by saying that Anita and I came from St. Mark's AME Church in North Topeka, where they're having a celebration this afternoon, that they received a grant, National Park Service grant, going to African American churches for rehabilitation and restoration. And the similarities of the communities, and they have their description. That was the first black church established in Topeka by, as they say, by the ex-slaves who came from Tennessee and Kentucky and later Texas. And, you know, where it's located, the floodwaters of 51 were about 12 feet deep. Amazing, the church is there. Talked to Vance Kelly. He says it's an excellent example of that early African-American church. And to celebrate with them what they are in our community and have been, it's over 100 years old, and what it has been throughout the years. And today we're in, again this afternoon, in a Muslim community. And in so many ways that in Topeka, as in America, we all came as immigrants, the Native Americans. But everybody I'm looking around, I think probably everybody here was an immigrant or came from immigrants at one time. And I think a point last Thursday was a day without immigrants. You may be aware. It was an event to focus on the 40 million foreign-born people in the United States, and about 11 million are undocumented. And interestingly, there were classrooms that were empty, landscaping crews, roofing crews did not come to work. There were no cooks cooking in places, no servers, restaurants had to close, and in some places in the country, even some McDonald's closed because they had no people to work. So immigrants are an important part of our society today. They're providing great things for our nation. And a side note I want to mention, In the 20s, the 1920s, it was a Ku Klux Klan, very strong in Topeka and throughout every community in our state. It was, of course, totally opposed and made life miserable for anyone who wasn't white, who wasn't Christian, or who didn't speak fluent English. My grandparents, thank you, the Amber Alert. My parents came from Germany and lived in Waubonsee County, and just in that time, in the 1920s, their mailbox was painted yellow because they spoke primarily German and went to church for German services. My mother told me, in talking to her mother, about how fearful they were when they were in America. I say that to relate to the Muslim community today, because I imagine sometimes you must be fearful in our nation, in Topeka. What will someone say to you? Where will you go? We think more of the women and their dress, because we know those things will happen. They do happen. But out of all of this, we have to continue to see who we are, and where we go. Actually, and I think the amazing thing is that all of us were immigrants, but how quickly we forget our roots and who we are, who we were. We were all like mutts from all over the world. And why did we come here? The same reason immigrants do today. Jobs, freedom, live the life that you choose. But now, the current immigrants, and some Muslims, there's a feeling that they're less worthy than our immigrants, than the people who came here for us. They're different. And we ridicule the language and the religion. Even though all of us were immigrants at one time, and our parents, probably our grandparents, great-grandparents, spoke pretty poor English, or none at all. And now it's terrible if you can't speak English. What a difference. The interesting thing, we look at the Statue of Liberty, and on it are the famous lines written by an Ashkenazi Jew attached to a sculpture from France in the harbor of a city founded by the Dutch. And it says, give me your tired, your poor, your huddled masses.
Yearning to be free.
Nothing about religion, nothing about race, no vetting. Come on in. That's right. And they said those during the time of Ellis Island, only 2% of the people were turned away. And typically, coming in, it would take more than approximately a minute. You had about a 6-second physical. They looked you over, go. That was it. So this is the life we're in, and we look at it in a way, so it's very troubling to me today to see Americans accepting false narratives that have created this turmoil over immigration and religion. And we must do better. Topeka is composed of various nationalities, as they are here in this room. And some people like to talk about that, all the different nationalities. But we're all family. We're all brothers and sisters, and somehow we have to get along, as brothers and sisters do. We're going to disagree, but we work together. We're a family. And I think in this room, we can say that we're all believers. We are believers in a faith, in a tradition, and that's who we are. demonizing immigrants and Muslims is not the way we want to be. It's not the way we want our country to be. Not what each other is. The cruel anti-immigration measures that are being considered and the religious restrictions is not the America that I want, and I think that most Americans want. So, reason, justice, acceptance. These are the values that must guide us. Reason, justice, acceptance. And in our city, I believe we accept and support our Muslim fellow citizens. You are an important part of our society, or our society. And so we hope that everyone here can reach out. And, of course, we're safe in this room. But tomorrow, the rest of the week, and next month, when we're out in Topeka or wherever, we have to take the first step to look and talk to someone that isn't like us when we look in the mirror, and extend that hand and understand. And also, in addition, we have to speak up. We have to say, we don't want it like this. Isn't the way it is. This is not the city, state, and nation that we want. And I can say on behalf of the city, to the extent that I can, Muslims here are safe. I'm so glad the interim city chief, police chief Chris Kramer is here. You know who he is. I can say he is a warm, caring person who wants to help. When there is a need, if there is a crisis, you call us. We want to be of help. So to our Muslim friends, Iman, Rihan, the whole center families, we're proud of you. We are part of you. We're with you.
Thank you, Mayor, for his kind words and his observation. At this time, we're going to call Rabbi Debbie Steele from Temple Beth Shalom.
Such wonderful words we have heard. And I have to say, this turnout is just amazing. It's so encouraging to be in this room, to look at so many people who want to be supportive of the Muslim community and of minorities in general. It really just makes me feel very good. I wanted to say I was just at the temple and we were having a study session, and we were studying about humility. And in Judaism, this quality, humility, is not about disappearing into the wall. It's frequently a way of referring to it is to say we need to take our proper place in the world. We need to step up and fulfill our role in the way we should. Not do more than our proper amount and not less. And I just think, my gosh, if everyone in this room, if we can stand up and speak out, for the rights of everybody and for support of everybody, just how powerful that will be. Just like our mayor just said, I just think, we can do this. We just need to be strong and not disappear and be wallflowers. So I just want to encourage us to do that. There's a saying, may you live in interesting times. We, for better or for worse, I think we live in interesting times. So, the question is, what are we going to do about that? I think that we can take this time to be a blessing. We can take the challenges and use them to build bridges, and that's what I hope we will do. I want to recognize today that we are at a time when Jews and Muslims are finding that they have some common concerns. And I hope that this will have the positive effect of helping to bring us and others who share these concerns together. So when I say common concerns, This is particularly true in a few areas, and I'd like to speak briefly about them. First, I think we share a dis-ease with the ban on refugees. Like many Jews, when I think about a ban on refugees that targets a religious group, I cannot help but thinking of the following. On May 13th, 1939, the German transatlantic liner, the St. Louis, sailed from Hamburg, Germany for Havana, Cuba. On the voyage were 937 passengers. Almost all were Jews fleeing from the Third Reich. Most were German citizens, a few from Eastern Europe, and a few were officially stateless. The passengers, who held landing certificates and transit visas issued by the Cuban Director General of Immigration, did not know that the Cuban president had issued a decree just a week before that the ship sailed that invalidated all recently issued landing certificates. You see, the Cuban government and the United States government were both caught up in anti-immigrant sentiment and with the fears of their day. So when the ship reached Cuba, almost none of the passengers were allowed to come to shore, and the ship was sent away. As many of you know, it sailed on to the United States, but the United States also refused entry to the refugees. And the ship had to sail back to Europe, a very dangerous situation for those travelers. The Jewish Joint Distribution Agency then frantically negotiated with 4 European countries who took in the refugees. But still, in the end, over 250 of those original passengers on the St. Louis perished needlessly in the Holocaust. So when Jews say never again as they remember the Holocaust, part of what we mean is that never again should any refugee lack a country to go to. Jonathan Greenblatt, who's the head of the Anti-Defamation League, said in a recent interview, "Jews know what it means to be identified and tagged, to be registered and pulled aside. It evokes deep emotions in the Jewish community." For these reasons, and because we have so often experienced the plight of being the immigrant and the refugee, Jews overwhelmingly do not approve of the refugee ban that our president has put in place, and are very concerned about the demonizing of groups of people who just need a place to settle. Secondly, we Jews and Muslims share being minorities in this country and have been the focus of hate groups here. 1 month ago, I had the blessing of spending time in Israel. At one point, I was up in the north in the Galilee, visiting a community called Givat Haviva. It has what it calls a shared society, where Israeli Arabs and Jews get to know each other. There I listened to a very articulate and impressive leader of the group, an Israeli Muslim named Mohammed Darasha. And this is what he said: "We understand today that stereotypes are born of ignorance. If we want to avoid ignorance, we need to get to know each other. Fear leads to antagonistic views of the other. But racism drops when we get to know one another." He said, "We make racists. We are not born that way." As they are working in a tough situation to bring together diverse communities, I think we don't have it so tough. We should certainly be able to come together and get to know each other. The anti-Semitic and anti-Muslim acts and speeches that are going on across this country, there are people who are feeling free to speak out, unfortunately. They are feeling like they can come out of the closet. But a good thing that is happening is that now across the country, Jews and Muslims are coming together and getting to know each other. And I pray that we will do that in this city, and that disparate groups will now reach out to each other and get to know each other. And that's what I mean, that we will turn this into a blessing. So that's my hope, that we will speak out loudly and proudly and stridently against any attempts to inflame and incite hate, and against fear. There's such crazy fear that people use to turn against others. We are, at our core, all human beings, and we should learn to live together and to support each other. So that is my hope, because I think the more that we do spend time together, the more we see what we have in common. I'm always struck when I'm on a panel with the imam, how much we have in common. You know, how many mourning practices are so similar in Judaism and Islam. And I think the more that we spend time with each other across cultures, the more we learn how much we share. So my question for us today is, do we have each other's backs? Will we appreciate each other? Will we develop support and affection for each other? I hope that this will for each of us just be a step, and that we'll continue to get to know each other better. Thank you.
I'd like to thank Rabbi Steele for her very beautiful words that warmed our hearts, all of us. Now, the next speaker I'm going to bring up, a good friend of mine. I'm not going to try to pronounce his beautiful last name. I think it would be an injustice the way I would chop it up. So I'm going to bring Reverend Tobias, president of the Topeka Center of Justice.
It's an honor to be in this house where I've been fortunate to be a guest many times before. We say in the United Church of Christ, to which the congregational churches here in the city belong, no matter who you are or where you are on life's journey, you are welcome here. That is something that we have experienced in this house many, many times. Not only did I have a chance to work with Kareem Hazim at the Topeka Police Department, but we also sent children to a school in East Jerusalem, Muslim and Christian children together as First Congregational Church and Islamic Center of Topeka. We put a peace pole in front of our church commemorating the relationship between our two faith communities, and I've come here for some of the best meals. I want to say that leave it to a guy born in Berlin, Germany to bring up the rear after all we've heard. You know, we truly do live in disconcerting times. And while analogies are not always appropriate, I think unfortunately that in the course of the last election and since then we have heard language that makes us all very, very nervous. It certainly makes me nervous. I come from a German family. Both of my grandfathers were pastors in what was known as the Confessing Church. The Confessing Church was that church that sort of defended itself from Hitler trying to take it over and neutralize it, but sure as heck didn't do enough to defend the Jews in their midst. There were exceptions like Dietrich Bonhoeffer and others, for example, but certainly they spent more time defending the freedom of the church from the state than they did looking out for their neighbors. And that is the truth, and it's a truth that needs to be held front and center. I want to talk about that a little bit today. We've done an incredibly good job in the city of Topeka, I think, in this group and other groups, trying to learn about each other's faiths. Interfaith of Topeka is a good example of that. But I have to honestly say, we need to move beyond just educating each other about each other's faith. Interfaith really needs to mean, I think, as Rabbi Steele indicated, that I've got your back, you need to have mine. If one of us is threatened, all of us is threatened. It is not acceptable for certain groups to be targeted, regardless of color, sexual orientation, religion, I don't care what it is. This is America, it needs to be America, and there needs to be a place and room for all of us to live lives as citizens here. And that's very important. I find it interesting that the mayor's last name, if I could be so bold, means guest of well-being, I think. Which makes missing in the current spelling, but I imagine it was once there. Or good guest. Hopefully we all prove to be good guests in this world in which we reside together, and equally good hosts. And that the relationships that we share with each other are precisely where we learn what it is that we need to learn about each other. It's building trust, and it's standing with each other in difficult times. If my family's history has taught me anything, then it is you can't speak up soon enough. Always take people at their word. Never say wait and see. It's not as bad. I think that's a huge mistake. It's not one I'm going to repeat in my lifetime for sure. And no matter what we may think or what party we belong to, we need to hold each other accountable for what we say. And if there are threats out and about, and if they get credence from those elected officials who seem to use those to throw as red meat to their base, well and good, but we should not accept it, not for 1 minute. I also had the opportunity of traveling to Israel recently, as Rabbi Steele knows, together with Rabbi Mark Levin from Overland Park. And we were part of a group called Interfaith Peace Partners. And in that, Christian clergy were paired with rabbis, and we traveled to the West Bank and back and forth between Jerusalem, Israel, the West Bank, back and forth, meeting with lots of different people, with politicians from both sides, but also with people-to-people groups who are, as Rabbi Steele alluded to, doing some really incredible work together. We talked with people from Kids for Peace who are doing great work. We visited a school of Israeli, Muslim, and Jewish children. We talked with those children. What's it like to go to a school like that? How do you feel in your respective communities that people know you're going to a school like that? Is that accepted? Do you feel a lot of blowback? In this case, the school had been firebombed just a few months before, and somebody had written traitors on the wall before they burned the library. So it's always hard. It's always hard to move across divides and to place one's faith in emerging relationships, especially between differing peoples. It's always difficult. It's so much easier to divide people and prey on people's fears and manipulate those fears to get people to do the unthinkable to each other. And the one thing I came away from Israel-Palestine thinking was, man, the people on the ground are doing some fantastic things. You know, they're exposed to a lot of fearful things, and yet they insist on working with each other, building trust relationships, which are really making a difference on the ground, even if at the political level it looks like not much is moving in a very serious direction. But on the ground level, all kinds of great new things are happening. You're all here on the ground level. I'm also a Christian minister, which tells me that I have a special responsibility, especially in the United States, where Christian pastors like to be very quiet and like to be loved by everybody, and who don't want to put a ripple in the surface of the waters of their congregations. This is foolhardy. You know, here we follow someone we call Lord, who speaks truth to power on the one hand, preaches that there's no such thing as someone on the outer margins of society, or anyone who's not loved by God. And yet we want to pacify everybody and look away while people are being discriminated against. This is unfortunate, and it is something that I think we should feel very sorry for, especially in your midst here. It means that we're not doing our work in our own faith communities, the work that we owe you in this faith community, because we're taking advantage of a comfortable silence while other people are scheming and plotting to do damage to others. We cannot be a party to this without being unfaithful to our own faith tradition. So I have brought something with me as a gift to you from the Federal Defender's Office in the District of Kansas. These are cards from that office, and I'm going to distribute them to you, Imam. You know, also in my family, people who are members of the police department woke up one morning and found that the law that they were supposed to protect, all of a sudden became an illegal law. And all of a sudden protected only a few people and was aimed against other people. That's not how we understand law in this country, and we never have. Public Defender's Office's job is to make sure that people's rights are protected no matter what happens. This is good for law enforcement, it's good for citizens, it's good for our nation. So these cards are for you, and the purpose of these cards are, if you hear that there are people who in the future, because certain words that have been spoken are put into actions, should in fact be put into actions, that you know that you need to call that office so they can file writs of habeas corpus to make sure that those people who have been arrested are awarded their due process rights. And I hope it never happens, but I'm not going to trust that it will never happen. I think we all need to be vigilant. We all need to be vigilant, citizens, law enforcement, others as well. This is the time to stand up and to say and speak clearly about what we believe, what we're for, and what we're against, and more importantly, to all stand with each other. Thank you.
You might look at your program, there's already been a slight change based on the crowd and the time, which is still good. A couple of things I want to do. Now, we want to have a question and answer period. We can still have that. And again, those of you that want to stay after everything is over, I'm here as long as you would like for me to be here to answer some of your questions, especially in reference to Islam. I want the Chief Kramer just to stand up for a minute. I want you to recognize him. I've worked with him for a long time. And the other two things we're going to do now, our secretary, I want her to come and say a word or two. Sister Jewel. And after she said a word or two, then our president, Rehan Razor, who's not on the program, but I think I want him to say a word or two and make an announcement for you. Okay? Thank you.
Hello, everyone.
Hello.
I didn't plan on speaking, but I am just filled with so much joy that this many people have come. And I wanted to have all of you give yourself a hug, because that is to you. The number of people that have come today is just a reminder that there are people within our community that support us and that are not listening to the media and that are supportive of this community. And you being here and being present just reinforces that. So I want to thank everyone. Those in the children's room, thank you back there. So I just wanted to thank you from the bottom of my heart and our hearts.
President of the Islamic Center in Topeka, Rehan Razor. He's been the president 5 or 6 times. we like him, and so that's why he's continuing to be our president.
Thank you, Umar. Umar is our very honorable person in this community. All of you know, and he was our advisor. Assalamu alaikum. It says Arabic word which means by peace be upon to you or peace be with you. So Islam teaches peace, peace, peace. So whatever happened in the media, this is all propaganda. This is called political stand, as all of you know. I like to thank, on behalf of Islamic Center of Topeka, all my guests, dignity, Topeka Mayor, police chiefs, a lot of my Rotarian friends, a lot of my political other views friends, this is amazing that you all guys came and support 30 different nations, like Mayor mentioned, that we live in Topeka for a decade, more than 30 years. And you'll see people from Asia, Europe, Southeast Asia, Middle East, they all came in Topeka, just like your forefather came for opportunity, educate the kids, and build the dream. That's why we all came. I'm going to share what happened. I was out of country for a month, just before our president inauguration. So I was out of country, and people was scared about 7 million people live in this country, Muslim, and then other immigrants like Latino, Spanish, that what's going to happen in this country's future. A lot of my friends said, do you think Mr. President going to let you in? I said, well, I don't know. Believe me or not, I've been here 30 years. My 2 kids, they raised and born in, one in Topeka, one in LA. My kids also fear. Say, Daddy, make sure you come home safely. It's not only me. The people who are traveling, overseas, just not only the 7-country banned recently our executive orders, I'm not on that country. I'm from Bangladesh originally, but I've been here 30 years back. And I travel every year back home. I never see the immigration people so rude, believe me or not. Never asked me a question last 28 years. That's the first time they asked me a question. It's too many questions. And, well, they can ask, but as a citizen, they should not. So see the difference. Racism is going on. Like Obama said, racism is still there. And we all believe, and other country people all believe that America is not designed for that. We have the largest democracy in the world. So our First Amendment been threat, press been threat, religion been threat, Muslim been threat, Spanish been threat. Like Mayor said, who's gonna work? You all deport 11 million people, so who's gonna work? Our economic will be a disaster. We're not gonna find any employee to work. You learn more or the cornfield or the restaurant or anywhere because you're lazy. Thank you again. We are in threat and the support you guys giving our community. We really appreciate bottom of our heart. I'd like to introduce my Sura members who serve this community. Could you please stand up for 1 second? My treasurer Hakim, there's a board member. They're working hard. They're all from Topeka. They're all, if you guys have any question, answer. This is your house. You know, this church is nothing different than your church. This is open to public. There's nothing hide. This is the prayer room. You guys can go and look in there. This is the bookshelf. You take the books and study. This is our treasurer. He got all the money, right? This is the people of my
Those that would like to stay over to talk and ask questions and have conversation with your Muslim neighbors, then feel free to do so.
No.
Hi, Assalamu alaikum. My name is Bushra Hashmi. So I just want to say something to Mayor. What you were saying, what to do when you are threatened, right? So I took my children to Hutchison on Friday. We want no, where are you from? And I understand always those questions have been asked. I've answered several times where I'm from. And I never, not never answer. I said, well, I'm from Pakistan. That wasn't satisfactory for me either. So the third question he asked was, are you all here? I said, do you mean citizen? He said, yeah. And I said, yeah, we're all citizens. And your kids? What do you do?
About Topeka being a sanctuary city, I don't have the legal background. I know cities have acknowledged some are saying that, and I don't know what word that means. A church can be a
Question better than a question.
Yeah, I had two questions. Oh, okay, two questions. The first one was, will Topeka be considered a sanctuary city? And without really knowing the meaning of that, we don't have an answer. The second was about
investment in Topeka to help bring any Syrian refugees to our community, and if there are any efforts underway that we could all be a part of helping.
Okay, the faith leaders, did you hear the question? You got an answer?
The United Church of Christ, the Kansas Oklahoma Conference in Kansas and Oklahoma, the United Church of Christ is studying this issue right now to figure out what it is that we could do to participate in doing so, yes.
I mean, obviously can't do anything right now. It's certainly something to consider when that's, hopefully that ban will go away, and then we should look at that.
Close the sentence.
I also know that the United Methodist Church in Kansas and Nebraska is studying the issue of bringing Syrian refugees into the States. I know that the United Methodist Church has put together a committee and they're studying the likelihood of their being able to sponsor Syrian refugees.
Any more questions?
We have a hand up in the back. Any other questions?
When I'm out in the community, so that, you know, I got your back.
Appreciate it.
Thank
Thank you. Well, you know, as human beings, we're all a human. We're from one human family. And so anytime there's oppression in the world, we know that that is not the will of God. It is against God's will for human beings to be oppressed by any other human beings. So it's irregardless as whether you say you're Muslim, Jew, Christian, atheist, whatever. If you're a human being, then we stand up for all human beings against any type of oppression and discrimination. And all human beings should feel that way because it's against God's will for people to oppress others.
I'd just like to respond to a woman who took her children to Hutchinson. We're talking about standing up. What if we were in line behind her? What exactly should we say or do?
Actually, it's got to be up to the individual, whatever that individual feel in his or her heart as to what they should say in response to anything that is negative or a stereotype.
Obviously, in the situation, you answer the questions. What else can you do? I mean, you know.
I think the question I was asking myself was, what if I was not a citizen?
Right. Exactly.
What would I answer there then? You know.
But you're a citizen, and you're being asked these questions.
Right.
And I think you just simply have to kindly but politely say, look, I'm a citizen, and continue in that vein. I think people around need to support people in that. I mean,
And tell him you're a tourist in his community who's come to spend money.
Inform him politely that you're going to report this because this is rude.
What difference does it make?
I didn't have a question, but I wanted to say that I've been sitting here thinking about a statement that apparently is traced back to Edmund Burke, I guess. But the statement is that all that's needed for evil to thrive is for good people to say nothing.
Any other question or comments? Well, again, thank all of you for coming out. And I think we had a very beautiful event, and I feel like Sister Jewel stated that we feel the warmth in our hearts for you coming out to be with us, to stand with us, to get to know your Muslim neighbors, and to have tea with us, even though I'm sure some of you didn't get any tea. There's still some tea left.
Oh, okay. Very nice.